Welcome to our Learn Community Education webinar today. I'm Dee Childers with Life Changes Elder Care Consulting and Vice President for Learn and the Community Education Chair. Today, our topic is applying for adult disability services. Our disclaimer for today, this content is provided for general information purposes only and not to be considered legal, financial, or health advice. Please consult with your legal, financial, or healthcare professional or other service providers before taking action on this based on this information. Today, our presenter is Mary Spears, support broker for My Doodad, and her website is up there on the slides and will be in the handouts that will also be attached as part of this education session. So, Mary is a fourth-generation Idahoan and a third-generation caregiver who was raised in a group home with 9 disabled adults. Growing up, she volunteered as a bowling coach for the Caldwell Olympics Special Olympic team, read for the blind, and delivered Thanksgiving dinners for Toys for Tots to people with disabilities throughout the Treasure Valley. In a professional career, Mary has been a direct support professional in home and community settings, worked in group homes, and was a house manager for 6-bed assisted living facility. And since 2012, Mary has been a qualified support broker with the DD Self-Direct option. In 2015, Mary founded My Places Community Events, which is a nonprofit providing community activities for people of all ages. And with that, Mary, I'd like to turn it over to you and you start your presentation.
All right, greetings everybody, and Dee, thank you for having me. I really find that this is going to be a helpful course because where do you start, right? So part one is going to be, where do we start when applying for adult disability services? And the topics we're going to cover are qualifying conditions or diagnosis, what and when, what those conditions are and when they started actually matters to what services you can get. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the documentation requirements that ensure that you can get those services. We're going to talk a little bit about entitlements versus needs-based programs. And the reason I wanted to cover that in this session was to ensure people understood what do we get as part of being an American citizen that has been federally guaranteed to us because of our age, the disability, or where we live. Those are entitlements, and entitlement is something that we're given, and then needs-based programs and the difference between them. And then we're going to talk about the 3 types of benefits that are available to adults with disabilities. And again, the what and when matter because different programs are available depending on when your disability or when your support needs started. I like phrasing things as support needs because I believe everyone deserves support. I don't think everyone wants it, and I don't think everyone needs the same support, but I think everyone deserves support to be healthy and happy and live their best lives. So, any questions on our where we're starting?
Looks like a great outline. Thank you.
Cool. All right. So we're going to go right into qualifying conditions and diagnosis. I took a lot of this information directly from the Social Security disability website, which all the websites and all the places where I found this information is on a slide that you will get in your packet or that you can download, and you'll be able to go to each of these places in order to hopefully make the journey through applying for these services easier. I want to pull back just a little bit and go, it's okay to get support. I think that a lot of people get frustrated when they need support and they get angry or bitter. And that to me doesn't mean that they're a bad person. That to me means that they're not getting the support they need. Absolutely. And I know pride gets involved a lot because nobody wants to feel like an invalid. Nobody wants to feel like they're less than anyone else. And I have worked with so many types of people in my life, from children all the way to geriatric. I've worked the spectrum in the different positions I've been in, and everyone I've worked with has been worthy of support. And that means you too. So if you're watching this presentation, you're worthy, even if you need support. So it doesn't matter what any of these conditions are. If you need help in order to live, you should get it. The common impairments, there's a nice list. Depression. Now, when the condition is on here, everyone can be blue sometimes. When we talk about depression for a qualifying diagnosis, it is the inability to get past that. I mean, everyone's had a bad day. Everybody's felt down. Everyone has dealt with struggles. Depression is a crippling inability to get past that. And mental health issues are a lot harder to see. It's not the same as a physical disability. If somebody needs a wheelchair, you're going to go, okay, obviously they're going to need a wheelchair. But if somebody needs a support person to come in and remind them to do their activities of daily living, remind them that, hey, if you don't do this, you'll die. That is something that needs support too. And that's where anxiety, PTSD, those are conditions we don't see. And I would hope that this helps you remove some of your preconceived or stereotypical, like, oh, that person doesn't need, oh, why are they getting support? They just get sad once in a while. It's like, everybody's living their own life. So there has to be documentation of how this impacts your life. And we'll get to that. Impairment effects, there's a whole bunch of different impairment effects, whether it be musculoskeletal, senses and speech, apraxia, the inability to talk. It's especially, Dee, have you worked with people who lose that ability?
Absolutely.
It's very frustrating. Respiratory
Sometimes
system.
dementia related, but sometimes it's not. And yes, it's dumbfounding sometimes.
Right. My own son didn't really start talking in sentences till he was 4, and they still can't tell me why.
Mm.
When I got to use support services to help him, he attended he was on an IEP through kindergarten, and you would not believe that he didn't talk till he was 4, because he can chat your ear off now. But that's because he got the support he needed, and now he doesn't need it. And that's when we're thinking of short-term supports like that, that's not what Social Security and disability and a qualifying diagnosis is going to be. All qualifying diagnoses are going to last 12 months or longer. They're going to be a long-term thing to get services. There's supplemental services you can get. There are community organizations that can help with, and community organizations, trying to think, and that just, I'm sure you know some that help with those short-term things, like, somebody needs a walker for the coming out of the hospital.
So Knights of Columbus is one.
Yes.
Yes, it's a very big one, and a great resource, great place to donate your unused medical equipment, and a great place to go check to see if they have it, right up to hospital beds sometimes.
And so digestive health, if somebody needs, I mean, could go into this. Do you have any questions on qualifying conditions and diagnosis that maybe can help come off this? I mean, the list is pretty extensive.
Right.
And if there's something specific that somebody would like to look into, they can look at all of these. Again, the link's going to be in that last page from this presentation.
Excellent. I think Mary, that's the right thing, is to be able to have a place, a resource for them to go get more information. And of course, they have your contact information too. I'm sure you'd be happy to help facilitate getting them in the right direction if need be.
Of course. So the what and when matters. And I have this slide twice actually for both parts. Was it an accident or an injury that caused the disability? Were you in a car wreck and you got a traumatic brain injury? Did you have a stroke? That's going to be different for applying for services than if you were diagnosed from birth with like cerebral palsy or Down syndrome. There are different pathways for getting services depending on when your disability happens. Also, when, for example, a traumatic brain injury, I have seen where adults will get a traumatic brain injury and they have means and resources. They are going to have access to more assets through Social Security than someone who has never worked a job before. You know how we all pay into Medicaid and Medicare from our checks?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's going to be something that will change the type and level of assistance and support or financial income that you would get. I don't know what's wrong as something, because I think there are a lot of people who know something's not right, but they don't know what is wrong. And it's okay to talk to people about, hey, I can't do this. And so when you're looking at something that you know you're going to need support in, that you're either not getting better at, or that's going to continue like past that 12 months, you want to think about how to start applying. And the first thing you've got to do is prepare to document. Everyone hates documentation. I've been told, like, nobody likes the word, I think. I love documentation. I love documentation because it is a proof that something happens. One of the oldest adages in healthcare is if you didn't write it down, it didn't happen.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And so, so you want to look, because eventually you're going to want to apply for supports. If you apply for supports and say, hey, I need assistance, they're going to say, why? Documentation is your why. And it's not because something is wrong with you. It's not because you're bad. It's not because there is something that is, how do you say messed up? Because I'm used to the DD world myself, where documentation, people get really frustrated about it because they feel that all they're doing is saying what's going wrong in someone's life. And I challenge everyone here and anyone listening to think of documentation as understanding what is necessary to succeed.
Well,
it's not what you're doing wrong. It's not what's bad. It's the support you need or the things that are happening that you can do better from. And when you get that support, or when you know what's wrong, you know how to combat it, and you know how to work against it. And this is my biggest goal. If I can convince people to change the view of documentation as what you need to succeed and not what's wrong, then I think that's a big success for us. Because we need to think in that positive.
Absolutely. I come from 30 years in human resources. So of course, documentation was a huge part of what I did then. Working as a care manager for seniors, we have to document everything too. So we're paying attention. And so one of the things that I learned early on from becoming a caregiver for my parents was just to get a spiral notebook and just have it with you for all things relevant. And it's a place to just jot things down when they happen. It's not like documentation has to be this huge event. I mean, at some point you collect it and make it a presentable form, but just to document things when they happen, because we forget timing. We forget what the circumstances were. This is, I'm sure you're going to talk about some of the other things. Well, maybe not this presentation, but like behaviors with seniors, what was going on? What was the conditions? What had happened?
They're an environmental factor.
They're environmentalists. So just to remember that, as Mary has said, that document. It's your friend. It'll help you keep information straight in your head. It'll help you present key information in all sorts of circumstances. especially when applying for benefits, but for medical appointments, etc. Documentation is your friend.
Very, very true. Maybe we need like a little emoji guy, or like, stuffed spiral bound notebook that dances to get what
I like
documentation.
I like the paper clip that Microsoft used to use. I wonder if we could borrow it.
I don't know. Microsoft, they're kind of proprietary. So what kind of documentation is good for applying for services? Obviously, any type of accident or injury report from your employer, police department, emergency medical or hospital, or your primary care physician. These are all going to be very important. And what is very nice, at least now in the digital age, is most hospitals use an EHR, an electronic health EHR, electronic health system, or electronic health registry. And those allow you to download this mass amount of information and not have to print it out in paper. I appreciate this part of the digital age a lot.
Totally agree.
Because I have had the binders of documentation, and it can feel overwhelming, especially for us who are going through it, to kind of make those determinations. So you want to make sure that if it's an accident or injury, having those initial reports of the treatment you received for it and date when this started. And that's going to be very important, again, for, is this before you started paying into Medicaid and Medicare, or is this after? Because that will, again, help determine what services you should look at applying for and which ones are going to fit best into the things that you're needing. Your doctor's diagnosis is very helpful. There are what they're called as pre-qualifying diagnoses. And like we saw on the last slide, there's a few of those. When my father was diagnosed with congestive heart failure, his application for Social Security disability was extremely easy because the doctor had his diagnosis as congestive heart failure. And that is just they don't want to mess with it. Because if you have a critical condition or something wrong with your heart, it's kind of like a gasket that's bad on an engine and it could blow at any time. And they don't want to play Russian roulette on somebody being at a job and having been denied for this to come back and say, you know what, I told you I had heart failure and now look at what's happened. So those are helpful. And there's some of those on developmental disabilities waiver as well. Autism spectrum disorder, trisomy 21, which is also called Down syndrome, and cerebral palsy. These are all pre-qualifying. Obviously, with these things from birth, you will need some form of support. Not all the same, not all intense, but it's pretty much seen throughout the history of knowing these genetic differences that you're going to need a little bit more help than someone who doesn't have them. So, and then family and friend letters are helpful. If you want to get a pattern and show patterns of care because your doctor can't quite understand what's going on, up to that, I don't know what's wrong, journaling, asking people. I know when I want to go and see a med manager for someone, having reports from multiple perspectives is helpful, because then it's not just you saying something's wrong, it's a group. And we all know things are more powerful as a group. And so having different perspectives, say, yes, I saw this happen. Yes, this person always needs this support when they're around me. It also shows the consistency of the supports you need, which then helps it makes it easier for them to say, okay, yes, here's your approval. Are we good with this slide?
Oh,
Do we move on?
Yep.
I don't always know if I give enough timing for people to ask questions.
You do good.
Thank you. Now, as I was saying, there's a difference between an entitlement and a needs-based program. Entitlements are provided by the federal government. They are put into law that say that if you meet this requirement, you receive this benefit, period. These include Medicaid and Medicare and Social Security and unemployment and anti-poverty programs. All of these have been put into law and said, if you meet this requirement, you get this service. CHIPS is a really good one for kids, the child health insurance program. That was actually, I found out recently, that was put in by Bill Clinton. I was surprised. These rights are granted to citizens by federal law. I said that. And some of these programs require contribution and some of them don't. Again, back to that requirement. If you've met the requirement, you get the benefits. The same thing. Some of these have a contribution, Social Security, disability, or I'm not sure which one. I think it's SSI.
Medicare, Social Security,
Medicare.
Medicare.
Yeah. When you
And
look into
unemployment
those, you can. And unemployment. Unemployment's one of those. You paid into it, you can drop out of it. Needs-based are generally welfare programs. They're also known as means-tested public benefits. They have strictly defined asset and resource requirements. These are programs that are generally designed for people at or below the poverty line. And that is because they are supplementing when somebody has no income or lack of income to provide for those basic needs or support services. It's been proven when people need those things and that they get them at a reduced rate or until they meet a certain place, that they become more successful and don't need them as much. When I was pregnant with my son, I needed Medicaid because I had no insurance. When I was pregnant with my daughter 4 years later, I had insurance and I didn't need Medicaid. My life changed, and because of the support I had making sure I could have my son, I was able to get everything I needed to, so I didn't need that program when I had my daughter.
So Mary,
So,
I would have thought that Medicaid and at least unemployment would be needs-based versus entitlements.
there is parts of it, and that it gets a little, I'll get into that in the next slide.
Okay.
Again, it's what part of it. And this is why and it depends on if it's being federally overseen, federally overseen versus state overseen.
Gotcha.
And this is the complicated part that I'm kind of, I wanted to give kind of a broad strokes of it.
Okay.
Because it's a good thing to be aware of, because I want people to understand when you apply for some of these things, you might not qualify because of your income, or you might only qualify until a certain point. And there's other resources. For example, in a needs-based program like I think Medicaid, when it's state, so Medicaid for children, CHIPS, is an entitlement for kids because they're a kid, but Medicaid for adults who are not disabled is needs-based. You see?
Thank you. That helps. Interesting.
Okay. Yeah. I know that an adult with disabilities who meets all the requirements of Medicaid, but because of their work history, they get a higher Social Security income.
Mm-hmm.
They might not qualify for Medicaid anymore, but if they don't qualify for Medicaid, they can't get services. And that's where you can consult and get what's called a Miller Trust, or you can get other things that hold back some of that income for necessities and then keep their assets in the realm of qualifying for the services.
Sure.
And so, again, that's a little deeper into it for applications,
Absolutely.
but it's very good to understand the difference. So yeah, for Medicaid, you've got, for CHIPS, that's kids. If you're under 18, you can get CHIPS on Medicaid as long as, and then as an adult, you have to have those income requirements. So That's oh, that was weird. I didn't know it did that. Okay. Benefit types. Income. If you become disabled and can't work, you need money to live. Again, it's going to be very important if you have always been disabled or if you became disabled later in life, whether or not you get income and how much that is. For an adult who has always had a qualifying diagnosis from birth, when they turn 18, they can apply for SSDI, Social Security Disability Insurance, which is this point, if they have not put any funding into, have never worked, I think it's $795, no, eight something. It's like $800 a month that they have to live on. That would be their income to cover all the things they need to. When you have SSI, again, that's need-based. And I'm gonna pull myself back a little bit because I might have done that wrong. So yeah, SSI is when, because it's need-based, that's the income you get if you've always been disabled or you become disabled when you're older. SSDI can be drawn on if you are the dependent of somebody who has passed away and didn't get to use the money they put into the system. And so, again, they're different. The SSI is going to be needs-based because you haven't put money into that system. The SSDI is the entitlement that you get because either you put that money into the system or somebody else has put it in and you can access that. That can be for children whose parents have passed away. That can be for spouses where one spouse passes away and the other spouse, their husband passes away and he was the breadwinner. It's an old term, but you know, everybody wins bread in their own ways now, huh? I say is I make more money than my husband.
Or you're gluten intolerant.
Well, there's pretty good gluten-free breads nowadays. So
that's true.
So again, the link to Social Security is on there. That's going to be very important to show what your disability is. Now you can apply for SSI for a time until you get working again. So for example, your disability might not be much longer than that. And you can say, hey, while I'm recovering, I'm going to need assistance.
Is there a qualifying period of time before that becomes available?
Timing is interesting in bureaucracies.
Very PC of you.
Right, yeah, I'm very PC. I have found that depends on the severity and the need. There are going to be some processes, for example, with someone who has a heart condition that's a pre-qualifying condition with the medical records from their doctor, where that can be established and set up in less than 60 days. There are going to be some people, and this is actually something that I have found happens a lot recently. There are some people who have had a qualifying diagnosis since birth, but because their parents step up and care for them and don't apply for benefits until they're older, that you end up fighting for that disability for years. And I have seen people who have, as I said, qualifying disability since birth, went through special ed in school, applied initially when they turned 18, they were denied, bounced around, and it wasn't until they were almost 30 that it was actually approved. And I was very happy to help this family get this set up for them. And the state, they actually back paid 3 years of payments to them. It was more like 6, but they're like, we're not going to give you 6 years worth of income. And of course, the stipulation when you get a back payment that high will be that you utilize it to pay all the bills you've accumulated and get down to the income or the resource cap. Again, with especially if it's SSI and needs-based, you can only have so much amount of assets before you start losing the amount of money. You can also get SSI when you work a job, but for every, I think for every $2 that you earn with employment, you lose $1 of your SSI. Those are all different factors to consider when determining whether or not working is going to benefit you or not. And unfortunately, that is a key point for some people, because why should I work if I'm going to lose the thing that allows me to live? I'm not going to discuss it. I'm just going to say it's an issue.
Gotcha.
Okay. So we got benefits. So that's kind of where income falls. That's all with Social Security. That is a federal program. You will deal with the federal office in your state. In Idaho, you deal with the Social Security administration over on Vinell. I think there's one in Nampa or Caldwell as well.
And their website has become amazing over the course of COVID. It's like a whole different world.
COVID had a few benefits, mostly in the technical realm. The mental and social, I don't think so much.
Yes,
there were some benefits.
Absolutely agree with you there.
Yeah, so there were benefits in the tech realm. People are at home and can play on their computers all day. We got a lot of plan work during the pandemic. Next is medical. Medical gets a little, there's a lot more pathways in medical. You've got Medicare, which is federal. It's an entitlement. Again, if you are 65 or older, if you have a disability that will be long, if you utilize the SSDI for more, or no, SSI, I have found that, this is my experience, if you are an adult with disabilities who's been disabled since birth, and you go on to Social Security when you turn 18, when you turn 26, you will be automatically enrolled into Medicare. This is a pain for people, and I'm giving this warning because it frustrates everybody. It was very frustrating when it happened in my house. Suddenly, Medicaid wasn't paying for things, and we were very confused. And it's because after 8 years of being on Social Security, it kicked in to auto enroll the Medicare for this individual. Well, they had Medicaid, and they still, then at this point, all they had was their Medicaid coverage. So when you're dealing with Medicaid and Medicare, you have to make them work together. And if you don't, it can be frustrating. So just be aware of that when you're looking at your medical benefits. Part A is hospital. Part B is medical. They also have silver scripts for prescription drug coverage with Medicare. Then there's Medicaid, which is a state. It is, like I said, it's partially entitlement and partially needs-based, because Medicaid is a federally funded program that is run by state. Mm-hmm. And so every state has their ability to determine how much of the federal things they're going to use. Not going to discuss that either.
Whole separate program.
Whole separate, yeah. So Medicaid will cover your durable medical equipment. It'll cover emergency transportation. It'll cover medically prescribed healthcare services, your physical therapy, your occupational therapy, your speech therapy, all of those secondary specialists that are out for referrals. Medicaid will cover that, and they'll also cover hospice. The thing to remember with Medicaid, especially as for our older population that become or need these type of benefits at an older age, Medicaid always covers second. So if you have insurance and with the company that you've been working at when you retire, and that coverage, that insurance stays with you, or you have a Blue Cross plan, however else you may have a secondary coverage, or you might have three coverages because you might have Medicare, Medicaid, and a third. Medicaid's always going to be last. Medicare will be last unless you have Medicaid. So the primary is always going to be your any other insurance is always going to be first when it comes to billing. The thing to be aware about with that is if your third-party insurance will cover a procedure and with so much out of pocket, and it's not an approved procedure through Medicare or Medicaid, you'll be responsible for any of that cost. Now, generally, all approved services with Medicaid and Medicare, you usually, if you have them combined, don't have any form of copay. Medicare, there is a copay times for services. But when you have both, in my experience, Medicare will pay the first part and Medicaid will cover the second or the last part. So insurance is tricky, but be aware that you want to kind of know what you've got to determine what you need to apply for, or what's going to benefit you the best, or what supports you need. If you just need occasional stuff because you've got to go in for hospital care for IV transfusions, you might just want to have Part A for your Medicare. It's going to be up to you. All support services need to be individualized to what's going to be best for you. Okay, and then we get to support and service. So the services, these are state programs and they're needs-based. Now, the Medicaid waivered services, such as the aged and disabled waiver and the developmental disability waiver and SNAP, are all support service programs you can utilize. There's also what's called the state plan. I am not as familiar with state plan services. However, they can help supplement things for respite and personal care services. And that is that's a state level diagnostic of what that's going to cover. And again, with needs-based programs, we've got eligibility. You're going to have to go through a determination where you'll have an evaluation of how much support are you actually going to need. Some of this is going to involve a nurse reviewer. Some of this is going to involve another agency. That will depend on the program you're applying for. That will determine which eligibility section. And then, of course, meeting the financial or the medical criteria for those waivered services. I want to, this piece of information will help you. So listen carefully. None of these people talk to each other. You will have to send this information to each one separately. Do not ever assume that they will talk to each other. And although it is frustrating, always keep your original and always make sure that if they ask for it again, you send it again. This information is key to preventing headaches and frustrations, because the number one thing that I have heard from people applying for services is they will be, I sent them this information. And I'm like, who did you send this information to? I sent it to Health and Welfare. Which part of Health and Welfare? Well, I sent it to Certified Family Homes. Certified Family Homes is not the same as the Medicaid services. It's not the same as your food stamps, and it's not the same as your medical insurance. They're all different departments and they are not interconnected. And we have to be the engine, the documentation that we create, that we gather. This has to be the engine that's going to turn the gears of the service of our clock service. Because when we build a support plan for ourselves, utilizing services and benefits, I always try to have people imagine an old grandfather clock. Okay. If you look at it and it's telling time and happy and dinging on the same start, everybody's doing fine, you're happy, right? If you open that clock up, there are gears. So your documentation is going to drive and be the turn shaft of those gears. Okay.
So-
And your will to get this done. And every gear you put in that clock has to find its way to work together so that you tell the right time and you get the right supports you need.
So again, documentation is critical here. Document when you send it, who you send it to, including the fax number or whatever. Mary, what is the standard identifying information that every piece of documentation you send anywhere should have?
I would always make sure you have your first name, last name, and middle initial. You should always have your social security number. You should always have, if you have Medicaid or Medicare, you should have that number. And you should have your phone number and email.
Do you think date of birth is helpful?
Yes, and date of birth. Thank you. Definitely date of birth, because it's amazing how I have dealt with identical twins. And their birth dates are the same, but their Medicaid number and their names are different.
Yeah.
And then their names rhyme. And it was like, oh, anyway.
I know there's another D. Childers in Boise, and it's amazing how many paths our lives cross. And so even when I go to the PCP, because the other D. Childers goes to the same PCP, I have to say, be sure you check this address, because it's easy, even though I'm guessing our birthdays are different, but still you want to make sure it goes to the right person. So these key identifying pieces of information are critical to include on every piece of documentation that you send in, including the date that you send it in.
That's very important. Also, it's very important to, I had a thought and it flew away. It's like you're saying that, and I was like, yes, yes. Don't you hate that?
Well,
like,
especially when you're out in space, like, they just kind of float away.
Oh, floating everywhere for me today. Here's my list of links for everybody. It's got, you know, your social security sign up, your disability some disability advocates, how to sign up for Medicare. Link is how to sign up for Medicaid. And then this is signing up for the elderly, adults, and disabilities, but we'll get into waiver services more often. I think this would be the questions, and we kind of got into that. I think what was I going to say? It was important, and now it's gone. So
I'm so sorry, Mary. That's when your head
okay.
is so full. It does that. That's okay.
Documentation. Just make sure it's written well. And
so those resource links, I have a PDF that will save to the Learn website, but those links, spots are live links from our resource page, correct?
Those will all take you to where you need to go. And that also kind of gives you an order in which to apply for some of these benefits. It is going to be easier to apply for your Social Security before you apply for your Medicaid or Medicare. Many support services, their eligibility will come back to Social Security. So if you, I put them in order for applying, you know, start here, then go here. Now understand, even if you don't qualify for Social Security, you can still qualify for some of these programs as well. And just start here. And once you get that gear turning, go to the next one. But that documentation and showing your keeping your records is important. You need to be your own advocate. Oh, that's what I was going to talk about. With the new electronic health record, with the move to digital things, please, please, please make sure your medical information is accurate. When applying for services, ensuring that you have an accurate diagnosis or condition can be a huge difference in the supports you qualify for. I have seen on waivered services a huge difference in the supports that someone could access based upon difference between cerebral palsy and microcephaly. They're very different diagnoses. And I have had some people that will come to me just exhausted from providing 24 care to someone, and they don't understand why the person doesn't qualify for more, supports budget. And they're like, it's 24/7, it's everything. And I started looking through the paperwork and the diagnosis was wrong. So be your own advocate and make sure those things are correct. Make sure that your doctor corrects them if they're wrong, because that's how you can get correct support for yourself. So I think that was it. That was the last one. Make sure your documentation is accurate. Make sure that you're talking to your providers, and make sure that I'm gonna stop that share. Make sure that you be your best advocate. And if you can't, find someone who will be your best advocate.
Excellent, Mary. Thank you so much for your presentation today. It was just so informative, and I appreciate all that you did. I've learned a lot today too. It's not an area that I've spent a lot of time in, but we do have clients that meet the same criteria, and I really haven't known exactly how to help them. So thank you for that. It's been great. Mary's website is here on the screen, will be in your handouts that are there on the Learn website. And so please take a look at them. And Mary, I know, has a very informative website, so check that out as well. We are
also interject just a little bit. The other thing you can also do is go to myplacesce.org for my nonprofits, that you can do community activities and come and see other people in the community that utilize the same supports you do, or just go have fun, because we go to Wood Creations like once a month. So if you like to paint, you can come do that too.
And that's myplaces.org.
ce.org.
ce.org. All right. Wonderful. Thank you, Mary. It's very, very helpful. I appreciate it immensely. Would like to invite any of you that are listening to the presentation today, if you're not already on the learnidaho.org mailing list, please consider joining. We do not send out a lot of emails. Basically, we send out one a month, maybe two when we first launch our next schedule for the next quarter. We will not bombard you or send you junk, promise. And want to just let you know that, as a reminder, that we have more than 100 topics in our video library where this recording will be housed, and you can go to learnidaho.org/channels and you will see all of these channels out there. We are adding more channels as this website and this format seems to be a great place for gathering all of the information that caregivers and family members might find valuable in this age of caregiving and trying to figure out what the path forward is. So again, thank you so much for joining us today.
I have a video on there for documentation and how to make it person-centered. So that one's already up from last year.
Excellent. Excellent. So yes, Mary has got another presentation out there. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. And Mary and I will be back in the very near future with another presentation to help you understand this very complex process. So thank you for joining us today.